The offseason is busier than the in-season conversation here, especially with Oklahoma football. So let's all get used to it. It's a new age in college football. Players' movement is going crazy, especially again for those places and those stops where there's a coaching transition like Oklahoma. Jump on in and get settled for Sooners Live for the next hour here at the Voice of College Football OU. As always, for 41 consecutive times, we got Jason Ray on the line from Last Word on College Football. Jason, how you doing today? I know you're still getting over some things, but glad to hear that you're feeling better.
Yeah, much better. Mark, thanks for having me. And like you said, it's a crazy time of the year. It's been a little bit. I think we knew it was going to be a little bit from Oklahoma's perspective, just kind of understanding that. To your point, Mark, the coaching changes and just how late Oklahoma was getting into that recruiting cycle. So knew that there would be some busyness with the portal and then the late cycle, but yeah, there's been a lot of discussion. A lot of things going on each and every day, and it's I saw a tweet that kind of came out, was kind of interesting, that was from one of the transfer portal. I can't remember if it was the 247 of the Rivals transfer portal. It said, is there a when have you reached the point where you're spending too much time refreshing and looking at transfer portal stuff on Twitter? So yeah, there's a lot. Like I said, there's a lot of movement almost every single day, and it'll be that way, I'm sure, up until that February 1st deadline.
I basically have a Twitter rule that I don't follow anyone unless they, number one, follow me. I've made an exception for the 247 Sports transfer portal.
Right.
All right. Because I got to keep up with that as well. Before we take the deep dive on all this personnel news with Jason, keep in mind that the super chat's available for contributing to the channel. Just you can also bypass YouTube and go to Venmo, PayPal, or Cash App. Just search Mark Rogers TV. We appreciate your contributions in any way. Hit the like button, subscribe, financial contributions, whatever it is. We are appreciative of it. Share the link out on social media, or just flat out tell people we are here with Jason each and every Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. Central Time to talk OU football. But if you subscribe and hit the bell for the notifications, you know when we upload new content, and also know when we go live, when we need to change the schedule. So we were just on the cusp last Friday of learning of some possibilities. Some were confirmed, some weren't at that point in regards to the transfer portal. So run those down for us, if you would, Jason. They're coming from all directions.
They are. It was a significant weekend of visitors for Oklahoma. Oklahoma had somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 or 9 transfer portal visitors from the stretch of probably around Wednesday of last week through even Sunday, this weekend. So Oklahoma has secured four commitments through the transfer portal. 3 of them are from the defensive back variety. So Kenny Walker, Trey Morris, and C.J. Colden. C.J. Colden is a cornerback from Wyoming, super senior guy, um, and they've got and he's a guy that played a lot for Wyoming. Second team All Mountain West Conference last year, had somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 tackles. Really good player that Oklahoma's able to get. Trey Morrison, he's played a lot of different areas in the back end for North Carolina over the last few years. Played safety, played cornerback, played nickel. So a guy that's going to be beneficial in Oklahoma's back end as well. And then Connie Walker from Louisville. Really, he's a young kid, hasn't really played a lot. Last year was his freshman year, played sparingly, but was a guy that, when he hit the portal, was a guy that Venables and the defensive staff targeted pretty quickly right away, as a guy that maybe not necessarily, he's not more of a plug and play guy like Morrison and Colden is, but I think he's a guy that they feel that has the measurables and has the talent that might be even a little bit of a little bit you know better than some of the guys that Oklahoma has on staff there, or has in the defensive back room. So from an athletic perspective, and then finally, one of the, and probably the biggest one I think for Oklahoma is Jeffrey Johnson, a defensive lineman from Tulane. He was a guy that Oklahoma just jumped on as soon as he hit the portal, and it's really kind of interesting how the portal works out. I mean, Jeffrey Johnson even said Oklahoma wasn't a team that he was specifically even entertaining or looking at, but he had in the neighborhood of 25 to 30 offers within a couple of days of his name hitting the portal. So I think that's a really big get for Oklahoma, really from the defensive lineman perspective, is an area of not necessarily weakness, but of guys that have left the program, moving on to the NFL. You know, when you talk about Nick Benito, when you talk about Perion Winfrey, and in that area, Isaiah Thomas as well. So an area of need, and a guy that Oklahoma beat out LSU, Michigan, Georgia, and some folks as well. So those are the 4 commitments that Oklahoma has been able to make, and they'll be in here for the spring here pretty soon.
Jeffrey Johnson, we'll start with him. He's played a ton of football, nose tackle for Tulane, 4 years as basically the starter, even as a freshman with 11 games played and 29 tackles that year. He's racked up 135 tackles in his career, 44 last year, 5 tackles for loss last year, 15 in his career with 10 sacks. 2.5 of those came last season. Trey Morrison at North Carolina, and we know the deal at Carolina. Mac Brown coming in. It's a better program, better recruiting, but he predates Mac Brown, was signed under Larry Fedora. Mm-hmm. He, again, just like Jeffrey Johnson, played right out of the gate as a freshman, 11 games started as a freshman in 2018. He has racked up 44 games played at North Carolina, so a ton of experience there. He's typically been in the 40 tackle range. He had 47 last year, 2 tackles for loss, few sacks in his career, and he's intercepted a couple passes as well. And then CJ Colden coming in from Wyoming, and Jason outlined some of his accolades in the Mountain West Conference. This past year, he had 67 tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss, and 1 sack. And he's played a lot of football, adding up the games, 25 games in his career, all 13 for the Cowboys of Wyoming last year. So a wealth of experience for these guys, and they've been extremely productive, those 3 particular players. And then again, Walker coming in from Louisville.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Mark. And I think, like, as I mentioned, Trey Morrison and CJ Colden is a couple of guys that are going to be in the mix next year, specifically understanding that they have a lot of experience, to your point, Mark, and then also an area that Oklahoma really struggled for the last couple of years in the secondary, and so I think those are guys that will have the opportunity to play immediately. At the very least, they'll be in the mix in that rotation and for competition as well.
We've got 65 on the line. Everybody must be shy today. We've got 65 on the line. We've got 1 comment. That typically doesn't happen. Usually we've got like 20 comments before we even fire this thing up. That's fine. Just kick back and listen. That's great. We've got plenty to talk about. But if you do have comments and questions, leave them in the live chat. So we'll go to one of the names that's galvanizing this fan base right now. People want to know about Jackson Dart. So the deal on Jackson Dart, one more time, would be that we're talking about a lightly regarded quarterback in high school football at Utah before his senior season. And I've heard it explained that basically he just lit it up as a senior and lit it up at the various camps, and suddenly he became a hot commodity and went to USC under Clay Helton, backed up Keaton Slovis, who was well established and entrenched as the starter last year. But once Slovis was injured, he couldn't get his starting spot back. Dart played well in about half the season there at USC. I don't remember the numbers, maybe 9 touchdowns, 5 picks comes to mind off the top of my head last year at USC. But yeah, he is not going to have an issue finding a landing spot. Certainly, he is much pursued here, and Oklahoma's in the running. So what can we speculate at this point? Because I use that word because people want to know exactly what's going on, and that's impossible to nail down. But as best we can take from this situation at this point.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Mark. To your point, I think it's really down. I think to Oklahoma and Ole Miss at this point for Jackson Dart, and even excuse me, and even Mike Trigg for that matter. It was really speculated that they would probably be a duo, meaning they probably would go to the same place. That's not necessarily true, not necessarily accurate from what I've heard. But the way kind of this has went down, Mark, is Trigg and Dart basically made their visits together. So they went to Oklahoma last week, had a really, really good visit, and it went even a little bit longer than expected. Went kind of half a day longer than they initially intended it to be. Then they went and visited Ole Miss. Kind of the same situation I heard went really well on that side. Oklahoma had an in-person visit with Dart last night. Haven't really got a lot of feedback just in terms on how well that went. Ole Miss had one earlier in the day, so I think when you look at this from my perspective, it's always good to have the last meeting, right? I mean, it's fresh within some of these kids' minds. So, kind of I've kind of heard some unconfirmed reports that Trigg was actually in Norman yesterday. Don't know how valid those are, but heard that was the case. He would be a great get for Oklahoma, even if they're not able to get Dart. I think he would be a great get just because of what the timing and who Oklahoma has in the tight end room, because they've lost quite a bit. Lost Austin Stogner, Jeremiah Hall's gone, so they've got Braden Willis and a few younger kids there. So I think it's interesting. Exactly your point on speculation. From everything I'm hearing, the Ole Miss insiders they feel very good about where they're at. Oklahoma feels pretty confident as well about where they're at. And I think, Mark, what the determining factor is here is, with some of these kids, how do they what's their bet where's their best opportunity to play right away, right? And I think, one might lean that Dart has an easier path at Ole Miss, given that the experience that Dylan Gabriel has with Oklahoma, and his relationship with Jeff Levy as well. I think if Oklahoma is able to sell Dart on the fact that, yes, you can come in and compete right away, get every opportunity to win that job next year. However, looking at the trajectory of Dylan Gabriel, hey, even if you sit a year, you're the guy next year. Considering if Dylan Gabriel moves on, if he has a good year next year. So I think that's the decision point. Mark, wouldn't be surprised to see it go either way. Wouldn't be surprised to see them split from what I've heard. Trigg absolutely loved his time in Norman, is probably more of a lean towards Oklahoma at this time. Dart, maybe it's hard to get any information because they've both been very pro both schools on Twitter. You take typically these recruits will take pictures in uniforms and stuff like that, and they were very pro OU, but then very pro Ole Miss as well. So I think it's 50-50 right now. I don't know that there's an initial lean, but I think it'll be interesting to see with Venables having that last meeting with Dart, if that was able, if he was able to kind of seal the deal and exactly get get Oklahoma in the door and get Dart to Norman. And I think when you look at this, the last thing I'll say, Mark, is on this. When you look at this, it almost feels like a luxury more than a necessity for Oklahoma for Dart, because when you look at Oklahoma, they've got Dylan Gabriel, they've got the true freshman Nick Evers is coming in. You've got Micah Bowens, who transferred in from Penn State last year, and then you've got the preferred walk-on Ralph Rucker, who's still. So their quarterback room is pretty heavy. So I don't think there's really a concern from a depth perspective. Now, you don't obviously you don't pass on a guy like Dart, who is probably the highest rated transfer guy remaining on the board, regardless of position. So you're able to secure a guy like that, then that's what you want. Obviously, what you want to do. But I think it's a much bigger luxury than an absolute need. But what a great luxury that would be to have two kids like that being able to battle for that starting spot for Oklahoma next year.
And what you alluded to a second ago, we can only speculate on in regards to that particular player's mindset about competition, meaning whether they want a ready made landing spot where obviously every roster has quarterbacks to compete, but basically they know based on what they've put on tape and on the stat sheet that they're going to win a job at said university versus, okay, this is a toss up. This other guy's really good. He's got a track record as well. And this is going to be an open competition, but I'm willing to possibly lose the job because I really like this coaching staff. I really like this university. Maybe this is an Oklahoma versus a mid-tier program, and I'm willing to sit for the season or risk sitting for the season to be at Oklahoma versus being somewhere else. All those things, it all depends on the player. So there is no mold for the decision process for any particular player. They all value different things slightly, and it's a bit of a guessing game. And just like the crystal ball on 247 Sports with the recruiting, they take their best shot on the information that they have. Some of these, I guarantee, even though I don't know that much about it, but in speaking to enough recruiting people, that some of those crystal ball indicators are very strong and confident based on having a lot of connections to the inner circle, but other ones are just kind of reading the tea leaves and getting a lean based on a lot of periphery things and really not knowing, but taking a shot at it. So we kind of do the same thing here. But as we've seen with various coaching moves just this off season, a lot of it just comes out of nowhere and nobody had any idea. So
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Mark. And I think the one thing that I would say, just based on, and you're absolutely right, the mentality of some of these kids is interesting just to see, and that determines a lot of where they go. Are you a kid that wants the luxury of feeling like, okay, I don't have a big challenge in front of me in terms of competition. But when you look at a kid like Jackson Dart, understanding that he went to USC, knowing that Keaton Slovis was the guy, maybe that leads things to believe a little bit that he's not one of those kids that shies away from competition, things like that. But I think the one thing also that he has to obviously keep in mind, if he goes to Oklahoma or Ole Miss, wherever he ends up going, and he doesn't get that job, if he was to go somewhere else, now he's got to sit another year. So I think he's being patient and just understanding, okay, just to get a really good feel on what where he feels the most comfortable at. Culture is a big thing as well, obviously, with some of these visits, and Oklahoma's doing a wonderful job in changing the culture for Oklahoma, for just the program under Brent Venables. One of the things that he talked about early on, he's very, very big on servant leadership. He's really big on treating these kids like equals, coaching them hard, demanding the best from them, but also at the end of the day, being there for the kids. I mean, and no other thing was more evident when some of the early enrollees uh, came in a couple of days ago, and you saw Brent Venables and the rest of the coaching staff out there helping carrying their kids' belongings to their dorm room. And so it's something that's probably small and insignificant to us looking, but I think to those kids, understanding that, the head coach, the guys that are, that have so much going on with these portal guys, with early or late signees, and they're taking the time to come in and help me move individually, taking pictures and stuff like that. I think that really means a lot to those kids. And some of the ex players are saying, I was there 3 or 4 years, and Lincoln Riley never visited my dorm room even once. And so I think that is going a long way and just kind of changing that culture. So I think that all those things combined with Caleb Williams still hasn't made a decision. So, he could possibly be waiting to see exactly what Caleb decides to do before making that public decision.
And just to backtrack and extend on your point about Michael Trigg, nobody's going to be impressed if they look at a stat sheet. He caught 7 passes last year. And of course, Jackson Dart played, plus he plays quarterback. So he's gaining all the attention. But we're talking about a guy who was the 4th rated tight end in the country coming out of high school and a top 130 player nationally, regardless of position, top 20 player in the state of Florida. So if he fulfills those expectations and that scouting report, then he's going to be a player. So that could be a huge addition right there.
Yeah, and it's definitely like I said, it's a position of need. Like Oklahoma has gone with Jeff Lebby's system. They've gone away from that H back mentality. So they're all tight ends. So, but like I said, you've got Braden Willis, who is a guy that has played quite a bit coming back this year. But then you've got some new guys. Jason Llewellyn, Caden Helms are a couple of true freshmen that have come in early, which is very, very good that they're in early. But at the same time, they've never played. And then you've got the transfer from Missouri, Daniel Parker, coming in as well. But he's mostly a blocking tight end. So yeah, I think having Trigg here may be even a greater need as opposed to having Dart. But obviously Oklahoma wants both of them.
We talk Sooners every Wednesday, 11:30 a.m. Central Time with you. Best discussion, debate, and analysis right here at the Voice of College Football based on your contributions. So we appreciate you being here. Don't forget to hit the like button. That's what YouTube requires of us in regards to the algorithms. So it helps build the channel, helps get the video out in traffic. Please hit the like button, subscribe right here at the Voice of College Football OU. Understand for you other fan bases that are represented in the live chat that we've got 25 total team channels. So check those out as well. It's funny because, Jason, as you well know, and we've experienced it here in the conversations with everyone over the last several weeks, that since Caleb Williams decided to hit the transfer portal, there is that section of the fan base that can't get enough talking about Caleb Williams, even if they don't even think that he's possibly going to come back to Oklahoma. They just want to talk about it all the time, either rail on him or whatever. Then you got your end of the fan base that they're sick of it. They don't want to talk about him. Good riddance, gone. But that's not necessarily the case. He's still relevant to the Oklahoma discussion. I'll give my little slice of it before you can take off on where we stand right now. And that's that I know better than to assume these things, but I all but assumed that when he entered the transfer portal that USC had a big lead in this thing just because of the connection to Lincoln Riley, and that they suddenly then had 2 of their quarterbacks hit the transfer portal. The interesting twist in this recently is that Mario Williams, who was the guy that was supposed to be following Caleb Williams as a tandem deal, well, he has committed to USC. So he's taken that step, and Caleb Williams is still unsigned.
It's such a bizarre situation, Mark. I'm with you on the outside looking in immediately when he hit the portal. I mean, you just kind of had the assumption that USC probably led. Yeah, granted, he was, I think, entertaining discussions with other programs and things like that. But yeah, no, I thought it was a foregone conclusion, and especially when Mario Williams went to USC, kind of the same thing. So here's what I know from a factual basis on Caleb Williams. I've heard from multiple sources that he did not love the visit to USC. I think specifically from not really from a logistical perspective, but more so from just kind of looking at everything around the program, facilities and things like that. I even heard from a few sources as well that he even went so far to say he hated it. So I mean, I think so I think it kind of comes down to, I mean, do you ignore that stuff around you and and focus on playing football and getting to the next level, or does the other things that surrounding the program really, how much of a difference does that make? So those are the things that I've heard that I think is factual. I think I believe that he's meeting with Oklahoma today, from what I've understood. Um, just and I don't know the extent of that meeting. I've kind of heard some things that's really just more of a more kind of a foundational meeting to say, okay, I appreciate everything that you guys have done for me, but this is what I'm going to do. I'm moving on. But Mark, I think the most interesting part of this whole story is, again, from multiple people that I've talked to, Caleb doesn't necessarily. I don't. I'm not convinced that he wants to leave. I'm more a Sooner, and he wants to continue, continue in this program. But I've heard there's a lot of people around him, including his dad, that really doesn't want him. Um, that really doesn't want him still to be at Oklahoma. They want him to move on to USC. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what wins over. And I think, you compare, you try to look at comparisons where some of these kids' parents just kind of get in the way of what they need to do. I even heard, I heard from some confirmed sources yesterday that um, Caleb's dad Carl reached out to Oklahoma president and just asking, "Hey, I haven't heard anything from you in a week or so. Where's the love?" So, I mean, if it's is it a bidding war, or is it one of those things? I mean, if it's a bidding war, Oklahoma, I do know that they have rolled out a very significant NIL package for him. I know that to be factual. I don't know that it's better than what USC has rolled out. I would venture to say it probably isn't, but it's something that's very significant. So at the end of the day, I still expect him to go to USC. However, some of the things that I'm hearing just about his internal desires is very interesting. So just like the Dart situation, I don't really know which way this will go. I mean, I'm still heavily like 95% feel that he's still going to move on to USC when it's all said and done. But at the same time, these things are crazy, so you never know, what's going to happen. And I think there was some comments about, what does that look like for Dylan Gabriel coming in? He came in knowing that it was a risk. He came to Oklahoma knowing that he could possibly have to battle Caleb Williams for a job, or even Jackson Dart, or whoever Oklahoma would have brought in. So I think that's, he knew that risk, that was going to be part of that situation coming in. So I don't think that really affects him. Obviously, he's at the point where he's not going to be able to leave, at least not immediately, if Caleb Williams comes back. So it'll be something to keep an eye on. I think by the time we talk next Wednesday, we'll have a better idea of what that quarterback situation is going to look like, because you have to expect that whether it's Dart coming to Oklahoma, whether it's Dart going to Ole Miss, whether it's Caleb Williams going to USC, or wherever it is that he ends up being, they would want to be in place by that February 1 date, so that they could participate through in everything going on in the spring.
Very interesting. We would love to have a sponsor here at the Voice of College Football Oklahoma, whether this is for the entire channel or just this particular show. So keep that in mind. If you own a small business or any business at all, have connections that could lead to a sponsorship, and hit me up at MarkRogersTV at Gmail, and I will let you know what we can provide for you. So National Signing Day is coming up the first Wednesday of February, as always. That used to be the date. Now, of course, it's in December, when 85 to 90% of the players sign, but still with roughly 10% of the players. Obviously, there's some gems out there. Somebody had asked, how late can someone sign? Last year, because of the dead period being extended and no campus visits because of COVID, and that continuing through the summer. I know that there were players, for example, JT Tuamalo, that signed at Ohio State. He didn't sign until the end of July, like days before training camp started. But based on what I'm finding out, it's back to an April 1st signing date in regards to when is the latest. That's the information I'm finding, at least. So
Yeah.
don't hold me to that for sure, but that's what I'm finding in regards to the last date that a player can sign for 2022 in football. It's a much different date for the rest of the collegiate sports for some reason, but probably has to do with roster management, which is a mess for these coaches.
Right.
So we've got a handful of players that are still on the board, and Oklahoma has a shot at getting.
Yeah, I would kind of start with the most likely. So there's been a lot of discussion about Gentry Williams, so the Oklahoma product, one of the best players in the state of Oklahoma, has still been committed to Oklahoma, has not decommitted, but obviously didn't sign on the early signing period. So I think really what his train of thought has been is he wanted to kind of get an understanding of what coaches that Oklahoma was going to bring in on the defensive side of the ball before he completely made a decision. So he's not wavered on his commitment to Oklahoma, even in the least. Riley and the USC tried to make a play. From what I've been told, he basically told them to kick rocks. Like he's not interested in going there. So he's not really taking any more visits. So I feel pretty strongly that Oklahoma is still going to be the play here. So much, just some of the people that I've heard and talked to have basically said it's not even an area of concern that anyone should even be thinking about. They had a meeting with him. The defensive coaches had a meeting with him last week. I'm hearing that he's coming in for an official visit this next weekend or here pretty soon. So would be completely surprised if he's not a Sooner. So obviously that would be super critical for Oklahoma in the defensive backfield, where Oklahoma's obviously, as you can see from some of the transfer guys, making some big changes in terms of kind of upgrading that talent pool within that area. But outside of that, there's three other guys that I've got on my radar that Oklahoma. There's probably some more, but I think these are three of the guys. So Josh Connerly is one, very very similar to the situation that you had mentioned with JT. I'm not even going to try to pronounce his last name because I'm sure I'll butcher it. But
It had been a while since I said it, and it didn't come out real well.
So he's a Seattle kid that has been not really super on Oklahoma's radar, but I think Oklahoma's got in there with him, had an incredibly positive visit, 5-star offensive lineman. But I think his recruitment is very similar in the fact that he's basically said he's not signing in February. It's going to be a March, maybe even deadline. To your point, the April 1st deadline. So it's almost one of those things. He's a 5-star kid. He's a guy that Oklahoma has a need just to kind of stockpile that talent on the offense and defensive line. So as an offensive lineman, he's a guy that Oklahoma is really excited about. However, if you have a kid that's not willing to come in until or make a decision until March or early April, he kind of holds you hostage to a certain extent. So but I do know that there's still mutual interest, and I think if you're a coaching staff, if you have a good feeling that that this kid is going to come, he's going to announce, he's going to commit to you, that maybe you feel a little bit better about it. But if your side is still kind of up in the air, maybe you go after someone else. But so he's another guy. Devon Campbell is another 5-star offensive lineman for really between Oklahoma and Texas. Kind of similar situation, Mark, with Caleb Williams. I've heard that Campbell really likes Oklahoma and wants to be a Sooner, but I think he's battling some family and some people within his inner circle that would prefer him be at Texas. I think so. I think he's been a Texas lean for quite a while. Oklahoma's making some inroads, especially with and it's not really new staff because Bill Bean on the offensive side still been that same guy, but you've got the coaching that has been solidified all across the Oklahoma staff, so I think that's still helpful. I would still lean towards Texas for him, but I think Oklahoma's making some inroads and still in a pretty decent spot. And kind of one of the newer guys, Marcus Cavante Henry. He's a guy that new line coach. Defensive end coach, I should say, Miguel Chavis has been really in on for Oklahoma. Had a tremendous visit this past weekend. He's a 4-star guy, linebacker. He has been previously committed to Michigan. Still has been a hard commit for Michigan for quite some time. Did not sign on National Signing Day, so he's a guy that I think Oklahoma feels really good about their chances with them. So, and I think the one thing, Mark, that you'd mentioned is the numbers. The numbers are interesting to know exactly where Oklahoma is from a transfer portal perspective, as well as just a 2022 recruiting cycle perspective. So I had heard that Oklahoma, don't be surprised that Oklahoma bring in anywhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 35 kids in between the 2022 recruiting cycle and the transfer portal. Right now, they have 17 commitments for the 2022 cycle. They've got, I'm just counting them here, 9 commitments from the transfer portal. So you're getting close to that number that Oklahoma, that I was told that Oklahoma was trying to get to, 30 to 35. So it'll be interesting if there's any additional guys that Oklahoma goes after on the portal as well as the recruiting cycle. But I think those are the 4 guys that people would want to keep an eye on.
Quite a few questions coming in here into the live chat, but most of them addressed by Jason in running down these various player profiles. I'm going to deviate just a second. We've got plenty of time here. Somebody noted in the live chat, I did not see this, but I got to figure that this tally can be ongoing each college football season. But College Football News has gone through all of the AP polls since 1936. So I just looked this up based on what was left in the live chat. They've gone through all the AP polls from 1936 through the latest one and implemented some type of point system. So that could be done a number of ways. I could assume that if you finish number 25 in the country, you get 1 point. If you finish number 1, you get 25 points, something like that, and etc. And Oklahoma has the most points since the AP poll started in 1936. So Oklahoma has been, by that measurement, the most successful in the AP poll at number 1. Alabama's close at number 2. Ohio State at number 3. You could give that to any college football fan that pays attention, and you would understand that those 3 teams are going to be at the top, and it's very close. And then a bit of a drop off to Notre Dame, Michigan, USC, Nebraska, which has to have been much higher the last few years. They've taken a beating the last 7 years. They haven't sniffed a top 25 poll since 2014. Texas 8, Penn State 9, Tennessee 10. So Oklahoma fans can take some pride in that. I don't know if that really proves a lot, except for that they're, of course, as we already knew, highly ranked most seasons and as impressive as anybody in the AP poll.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I think, one of the things, it's always an interesting debate for me, Mark. And we did an article, and we're looking to do another one, just kind of a refresh version about 3 or 4 years ago. Looking at the top 15, top 25 blue bloods, in college football, and the debate's always interesting. To me, Mark, just on the criteria that the people look at in terms of what what really constitutes a blue blood. And I think this is one of the big criteria, right? What's your AP number 1 rankings, top 5 finishes. Some of the criteria that we've looked at in the past is obviously number of national championships was maybe the biggest the biggest criteria. But when you take into effect take into account uh, some things, other things such as All Americans, some things such as conference championships, some things such as how many draft picks, first round draft picks, or just overall draft picks have come from that school. It's very interesting, and when you look at it, exactly to your point, when you look at all of those combined, you've got probably some, when you're looking at a top five, you've got some combination of Oklahoma, Michigan, um, Notre Dame, Alabama, and probably Ohio State that are right there in the top five. So we'll this will be a shameless plug for me, but we'll we'll look at doing something like that in the off season and look to see maybe how that has changed from year to year over the last 5 years. But yeah, I mean, when you look at that, Oklahoma is obviously definitely in that top five, but it's always interesting to look at what do people feel is the most important criteria or the most important category, or however you want to state it, on what constitutes this team or this program being a blue blood.
Yeah. So I find this debate intriguing, and I've started to tackle it a few times and have had the request on the main channel from a number of people to tackle this. And I've thought about it and wanted to know, okay, what would be the best criteria? Do you consider a national championship in 1950 to be as valuable as a national championship in 2021? Or would that have to be weighted in some way? Because shoot, forget 1950. How about 1889 awarding national championships? You got to give it some weight, but do you just flat out say national championships are national championships? And here you go. Whose national championships? That's the other thing.
Mhm.
Whose national championships? We've got so many. If you added up all the national championships claimed by everyone in the country, it probably adds up to about 400. Well, we've been playing college football for, I think, 150 years. So it's obviously we've got way more national championships claimed than years. Alabama's maybe the number one
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
on
I
the
mean,
list of claiming national championships that are somewhat tainted.
right. I think they've claimed somewhere 16, 17, even maybe even more.
I think they're at
Yeah,
18.
what I've always done is just kind of looked at the AP, just who the AP has recognized as the national champion, and a lot of it's in total. I mean, I think someone has mentioned here in the chat that Michigan's only 12 wins away. All time wins is another big win, and I think the debate for me always always ends up being how much how much weight do you give national championships? Because when you look at and how far back do you go to consider a team a blue blood? Because I mean, Clemson's a great example. If when you go back when you, if you go back from the last 50 years, they're definitely not even, probably not even in the conversation. They've got one
No.
before Dabo came. They've got one national championship before that. But over the last 10 to 15 years, yeah, I think most people would consider them a blue blood. Maybe even Georgia comes into that same conversation as well, at least at a top 10 level. But and so when you look at a team like Oklahoma, you say, okay, Oklahoma has the tradition and they've continued to be really, really good, but at the same time, Oklahoma hasn't won a national championship in 21 years. So, what kind of bias or what kind of weight do you put in on recency versus the over the last 50 years? So it's such an intriguing conversation to have.
See, I'm with Preston here, and I didn't even read his entire statement. There are two things to me, and if somebody else has something else, please offer it. But there are basically two objective criteria. Everything else is subjective. National championships are subjective. They are really subjective. Now we've gotten to a place where they're subjectively selected, the playoff teams, and then they win the national championship on the field. So we have the most objective national champion today than we've ever had. And then before that, the BCS championship game. But understand that even the selection of those teams is completely subjective. It's not the NFL playoffs where wins and losses are all they count. So to me, there are only two objective measures. Number one is your win-loss record. Those were the results on the field. Now, you can argue who played a tougher schedule. You can always do that. But the wins and losses are completely objective.
Mhm.
And conference championships are objective. You play in a conference, the winner of the conference is the conference champion. Nobody's deciding anything. We don't have a committee. We don't have a poll. We don't have, you won your conference, you didn't win your. So I put a lot on conference championships and I put a lot on winning percentage. I believe the winning percentage battle right now, Ohio State and Alabama are like, they have almost the exact same winning percentage. It's like 731, and Oklahoma's right behind them.
Yeah.
That's your winning percentage battle right now. Michigan, of course, is going to claim wins, and they're valid. They are valid wins. They're in the record book, but they started playing football a lot sooner than a lot of other teams. So that's, but their winning percentage is certainly up there in the top 5. So it's not like their wins total is invalid. But for me, the national championships, do they mean something? Yes. The further we go along in history, the more they are meaningful. But I'm a big winning percentage guy and conference championships because, again, those are objective.
No, you're absolutely right. I agree 100%. I mean, it's a much better criteria, I think, than looking at just all time wins, is looking at win percentage. So, I mean, I think the one thing that another thing that's really kind of interesting just to debate is when you look at conference championships and see, the over the years, which conferences have been better, right? When you look at the SEC hasn't always been the premier conference in the country like it's been over the last 10, 15, 20 years for a good period in the 70s, well, probably more of the 80s and 90s, the Big 8 with Oklahoma and Nebraska and Colorado almost every year being a perennial top 10, 15 program, in yeah, late 70s and then throughout the 80s, the Big 8 was considered one of the best, one of the best conferences in the country. And I think when I was doing a little bit of research, Mark, looking at the Big 10, it's just it's so interesting to see how many conference championships, and just looking over the last 50 years, how many conference championships Ohio State and Michigan have compared to the rest of the Big Ten. It's a significant drop off, and you could probably say the same thing for Oklahoma and Nebraska in the 70s and 80s to that extent. But yeah, it's very interesting. How much weight do you give through a period of conference championships in the SEC or the Big 8 or the Big 10 at that time versus maybe the Pac, well, it would have been the Pac-10 at that time, and or even the ACC, where you've seen different teams have really just been dominant through different eras, right? You've had Florida State that was really dominant through a long period of time. You've had of course, Miami was really more Big East, I guess, at that time, weren't they? But then, but so it's very an interesting conversation to have for sure.
And you brought up NFL draft selections. It could be debated on one hand, what's it matter, NFL draft selections, that those players have moved on, and that's the NFL evaluation, the pro football evaluation of those players. That doesn't necessarily mean that they produced well in college. There's so much that goes into that, but I think it's an interesting, and that's just another metric that pretty much falls in line with everything else. If you look at the top 5 to 10 programs that have produced the most number one picks, meaning first round selections and NFL draft picks, they're the same teams. It's still Ohio State and Alabama, USC, Oklahoma, on down the line. It's still the same collection of teams. So there must be some validity to it. I consider the Heisman Trophy to be the most prestigious award in American sports.
Mm-hmm.
People remember who wins the Heisman Trophy. do people remember for as popular as the NFL is, and it is king of TV ratings. People don't remember who wins the NFL MVP. Very few people keep track. The Heisman Trophy, it's very prestigious, but again, it's subjective. People decided who supposedly is the best player in the country. It's not, I don't know that that should be weighed in very heavily. For one reason, it's individual. Number two, again, it's an award.
Yeah, no, it really is, and I think you know you've got the same guys, you know, the same people that are still there. I think there's a lot of, you know, with the discussion about this. I mean, there's I don't think there's a lot. I mean, yes, where do you place them in the top 10? I think can be a little bit subjective, and just in terms of who has that, you know, the top spot, or, you know, anywhere through the top 10. But I think, you know, when you look at those teams, they're, you know, they're pretty similar. I think, you know, Oklahoma has the I don't know if they have the most Heisman. Alabama probably has the most Heisman trophies. I'm trying to remember.
Oh, Alabama just won its first Heisman in 09.
Right. Yeah, that's
I
right.
believe 3 or 4. I think Ohio State, Notre Dame, and USC are all tied.
Yeah.
I think.
Okay. So when you and yeah, I think they have. Do they have 5? All have 5 apiece,
They all
or
have 7.
7? Okay, because Oklahoma is at. I think Oklahoma is at either 5 or 6 right now. I'm trying to remember.
I think they all have 7. So according to this article, Ohio State, Oklahoma, and Notre Dame have 7.
Okay.
And USC's got 6. I thought it was 7, 7, 7 with the other 3. But anyway, that's what that's showing us. Interesting.
Very interesting.
Let's see if we can verify this. Yeah, I've gone to 3 sites. It's Notre Dame, Oklahoma, Ohio State tied with 7.
That's right. That's right. I'm trying to go through and remember Jimmy Vessels, Steve for Oklahoma, Jimmy Vessels, Steve Owens, Jason White, Sam Bradford, Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield. Did I rattle off 7 there? I'm trying to think. Who am I?
I wasn't counting.
So, anyways, that's neither here nor there. I think 7's the number. You confirmed it. There's some people here on the chat have confirmed it as well.
I may upset whomever put it in the live chat, and they led to me looking it up. So I appreciate you putting in the Oklahoma's the greatest football program of all time, according to USA Today. I've Googled this all over the place to try to find USA Today, and I keep running into College Football News. Maybe it's under USA Today, but I don't necessarily know if they're proclaiming, based on what I'm reading, Oklahoma is the greatest football program of all time. They did a metric system that evaluated the AP poll, and basically the AP poll is telling us that Oklahoma is the #1 football program of all time, just based on the number of finishes in various slots each year. And it's 7 points above Alabama and like 9 points above Ohio State, which seems to be fairly minuscule in adding up all those points over the span of like 80 years. So
very interesting. Yeah. No, I mean, you can't. I mean, I think AP is is what we would all go by in a lot of our research on this. So yeah, I mean, I think that's fair.
Oh, I know where I got tripped up on. Somebody's bringing it up here. This is where I got tripped up on USC 7. They truly have 7. Reggie Bush had his taken away 6.
Okay.
So there's, in actuality, the way I count it, there's a 4-way tie for first.
There you go. Yeah.
He won the Heisman.
I mean, he still won it, right? Like, he still earned it on the field. So I would consider it the same way as you. Yeah.
All right, folks, it's always a good discussion here on Oklahoma football. We've got so much to talk about and have over the past hour. So if you've missed any portion of our conversation, we covered top recruits out there before National Signing Day. We covered the 4 transfer portal guys that have signed with Oklahoma over the past few days. And then, of course, Jackson Dart, Michael Trigg, Caleb Williams, and all of the speculation there and the indicators of where they're going. So please dive in. And this video will post here in just the next few minutes. We'll be back here hopefully next Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. Central. That's our set time. We make it just about every time, but that's why you need to subscribe, hit that bell for the notifications to know when we go live in case we need to reschedule. We appreciate everybody being here. Jason, this is the guy that makes it work right here for 41 consecutive weeks. So Jason, we appreciate it. And we will see you soon.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, guys.